What's up, everybody? Alberto here from Stark. Today, I want to invite you to join me in a conversation with my friend and colleague, Claudio Vera. He's an industry expert in accessibility in both design and engineering. And today he joins us to talk about how he got into accessibility and how you and I can also get into accessibility, add it to our processes, workflows, etc. So without further ado, please join me. Claudio, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really happy to have you. This has been a long time coming, so I'm glad we were finally able to make it. But first and foremost, can you please introduce yourself and tell me what are you up to these days?
Sure. So I'm Claudio Luis Vera, and I am an accessibility professional. I kind of have a weird role in the community because on one hand, I'm like the digital accessibility lead with a major cruise company. And then on the other hand, more active as like a gadfly and a community leader in the accessibility community and in the South Florida UX community. So I kind of, over the last few years, kind of played a little bit of this role of evangelist, starting to talk about accessibility like 3 years ago. And then fast forward to now, it's something that's a really commonly, talked about subject in the community here. And there's a lot of traction and a lot of interest in it, which has been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've told you this before, but I think the first time that I really got into accessibility, I had heard about the term before, but it was really when going to one of your speaking events down here in South Florida that I really got into it. And I saw sort of the impact that drove the curiosity to dive a little bit deeper. So, again, it's pretty awesome to have you here today. Would you mind going into what got you into accessibility? Like, how did you first come about it and how did you get into that part of the industry?
Well, I got into it as a designer. I was a creative director. I was working a big, large website for a chain of hotels. And all of a sudden I got handed an audit that said, that there were a million things wrong with the website that we had built.
Oh, no.
And we needed to fix it. So, and suddenly this hotel chain was putting a lot of energy into making the fixes. So I presume maybe there was some sort of legal settlement or something involved with that. But that was, I would say that was my reintroduction to accessibility. Like this is going back like way back, like late 90s. I had a design studio in Boston, and my sales guy and I went over to Cambridge to where the W3C officers were. And we had a meeting there with Judy Brewer, who was just starting this initiative within there, within the W3C that was related to accessibility. So I was introduced to it back then in the late 90s, and I thought it was interesting and I thought it was amazing. And it's like, hey, yeah, let's add accessibility to the next project where we can have budget for it. 20
Yeah.
years later, you want to take a guess at the number of times that we added it into a project?
How many times?
0.
Oh, man.
So I think that's the thing about accessibility. It's like, like you can have like the best of intentions. And when it comes down to, reality, and when it comes down to, working it into a budget, unless you have some sort of mandate to do it, it's not going to happen. So if you're thinking of it as a nice to have, it's not going to happen. If you're thinking that accessibility isn't MVP, it's not going to happen.
So in a sense, it has to be part of your original requirements. If not, it's going to be impossible to sort of retrofit it into the project.
Mm-hmm. And I would say like in those 20 years in between the two, I was that creative director. I was that designer. I was that front end dev that really didn't take accessibility seriously enough to really make it part of my everyday work. And so, if I were to show you stuff from my portfolio from 4 or 5 years ago, it wouldn't meet the standards that we have today. So it's kind of like,
I'm guilty of that too.
yeah, and this is part of like, I guess, the original sin that we all come into it with, that it's less about what we did in the past, but it's like once you kind of realize this, then there's no need to do it going forward. And it's a growth, it's kind of like, when you discover some new technique, like let's say, you discovered some new way of using design tokens or SaaS or something like this, right? And you're going to look at your work from before that moment and you're going to go, that's garbage. I'm embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
So I would almost say like me adopting accessibility was kind of the same thing, maybe times three. So I'm like, ooh, God, no, no, no. I can't be pointing back to my work because it just, it wouldn't meet the sort of standards that I would want all of us to live up to now.
So you mentioned the reason why you got into it was because you got an audit. So it was almost like the problem came before you had to start researching the solution. But once you got into it, how did that make you feel? I mean, I don't
So
know
that
how
was
else to ask this, but really what drives you in terms of being part of the accessibility community and being a leader in our community?
the how. I mean, the why. I think all of us designers, in UX or in interactive or in digital, run into this where even if you come up with the best, most cutting edge work, you know, in 3 or 4 years, it's ready for the trash heap. And that sort of impermanence of your work just starts getting to you. And after like decades of having work and having a portfolio where I can't even show like groundbreaking work that I did in the 90s because it looks hopelessly dated. And so it started feeling like I was doing Tibetan sand painting, where the monks take these little things of sand, they spend an entire week doing this elaborate mandala and stuff in sand, and then they have this elaborate ceremony where they just sweep it away, um,
Yeah,
kind of to show the sort of impermanence of the material world, and stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of the way I felt about my design work. And so I got to a point where I'm just like starting to feel like, okay, I can't have my legacy being a string of projects that I can't show anymore, or a string of websites that's decommissioned. Maybe the only thing I can show are like the snapshots that I have right before it went into development from like Photoshop or Fireworks or whatever app I was working with. So that sort of impermanence and that sort of feeling like I wasn't leaving a legacy, one thing, and then finding accessibility and finding something where you go like, oh, wow, this is potentially world changing. This is something that has an impact on people's lives. This isn't me building marketing sites where I'm trying to sell things that people don't want. It's more about really genuinely changing the quality of people's lives.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's something I latched onto. The other thing, and I can't stress this. Maybe I'm getting way too personal for this interview,
No,
but
please
it,
go for it.
it's like I have a sense of purpose now that I never did as a creative director. And that feeling, and people get on in years and stuff. And when you get older, that sense of purpose becomes that much more important. And so waking up in the morning feeling like, hey, I am working for a cause. I am working for something that is going to improve us and, where we are as humans. And that motivates me like so much more than anything, the last 25 years or so, my career.
That's amazing. Yeah, I can definitely feel it on my side too. You mentioned something that I always think about. I try to turn it into a positive for sure, but it's the lack of permanence in the way that I personally do as a designer or my teams do as
Right.
designers, because it's ever changing. And, we're sort of victims to the technology available to us. We're developing for when I started doing product design, I was designing for clickball on a BlackBerry device and a physical keyboard, right? And then we
Mhm.
moved to these slabs of glass with touchscreen and touch sensitivity. It really changes even the resolution of the screen. It really changes the output and how you think about how you're going to be designing for this particular device. But we're around the corner from an iPhone 12 announcement. There's new Androids coming out basically every day. So we have to always think about what is technology allowing us to do, cloud computing, computer vision, etc. It really changes how we approach a problem and deliver on a solution. So that part to me is very, very exciting because it
Right.
means that we're always learning, we're always applying new things. but that what you described as a lack of sometimes feeling like a lack of purpose or permanence, like what am I leaving behind if not a trail of
Hmm.
outdated designs? I think that's a really interesting way of seeing it. I love that because like you, I believe that accessibility provides something more than just what you see on the screen in any given moment.
Right. And feeling like I have a purpose. And, I mean, for me, the purpose, and I've been always been like crazy ambitious in my life, so for me, my purpose going into this is really to try to change the design world, really trying to change how UX designers view accessibility, change how developers approach their work, and make basically flatten out the bumps in the road and eliminate the barriers for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Yet the other thing that's really cool about this is, like, I don't think people realize just how amazing assistive technology can be, and how we're kind of like, we're used to working with our products, the way able people work with our products. But when you start picking up these apps, like there's a version of Google Translate where you can take your phone, you can point it to, like, for instance, a package that has nothing but Chinese written on it, and it will read you the what's on the package in English. Like, to me, that's like magic.
It is. It is. I actually had to move due to work. I had to move to Berlin back in 2017. And the only way I could do groceries was using Google Translate on my phone to
Oh, so you've
in
used
real
it,
time
yeah.
Oh, I've used it plenty. And that's the thing. When you think about in terms of accessibility, we're always thinking about able, disabled. We're not thinking about all of the different applications that really makes everyone's life better when products are accessible, right?
So there's another interesting product that is show and tell. It's like the Echo Show and Tell. So it's like an Alexa product. It sits on a desktop. It has a screen, and your grandmother can take a can of something that she can't read, or bottle of medication, put it close up, tell Alexa to read it for her, and it'll do it.
That is really awesome. I haven't seen that actually.
So, there's so many of these sort of apps out there that are just mind blowing. There's another one, Microsoft Soundscapes, which it does 360 audio. And so what
Oh
it
yeah.
does, it's like, imagine Google Maps for somebody who can't see. So if I'm trying to find the grocery store that's 4 or 5 blocks away, and I put soundscapes in my ears, it will basically create a little thumping sound in the direction where that grocery store is.
That's
And it'll
incredible.
navigate me, to wherever that point is, through sound. So it's a free app. It's on iOS. You can download it, wear your AirPods and try it out. It is pretty amazing. I've actually been
That
trying
is
to
so cool.
get the folks at work to use it, for wayfinding on cruise ships and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds amazing. So Claudio, in your line of work and what you do for this for the Miami design community or the community at large, really, we do find a lot of folks, and I imagine you must get this question all the time. Folks who are they know a little bit about accessibility, they're wanting to get more involved or wanting to get into it, add it to their workflow. What do you say to those people? What is the best way to sort of accessibility one-on-one get started today?
Okay. I would say jump right in. Like, my favorite things, like I have like two favorite pieces of content that I love the most. So the first is the Microsoft Inclusive Design Handbook. So if you go to Microsoft site, you look up inclusive design, you start following this trail, it gets you to this handbook that starts talking about inclusion, and it starts talking about, like, you've probably seen these illustrations everywhere where it talks about the difference between permanent disabilities, temporary disabilities, and situational ones. So that's like the beginning of kind of opening the door. And then if you're taking it a little bit more seriously and you're thinking about bringing it into your practice, my colleague Derek Featherstone he's an excellent instructor, he's an excellent speaker, and he has two courses in web accessibility that are on LinkedIn Learning, which used to be lynda.com.
Yeah.
And I would say those are great, but you have to pay for those. Hell, if you were in Miami, I'd be like, go watch me and Marcelo speak.
Yeah, we do have some great
And it's
events.
free.
Yeah, and you mentioned that. I think the Miami community, through you guys, really has really turned into sort of an accessibility first community, which I think is quite amazing, and I'm quite proud of that, to be honest. To be able to say that if you need to talk about accessibility, tap into, now that all of our events are virtual, seriously come in, raise your hand, ask questions, learn a lot.
You have to thank Marcelo for that, because I mean, for me, I would just talk about accessibility all day long. He's just the one who's had the patience to tell me not to shut up about it.
For sure. I think, and with everybody sort of getting into it and learning, as I mentioned, if it wasn't for you, even Stark, to be honest, and getting into these products, getting into your talks, and really using that as a catalyst to do some more research around it, and seeing how I could include it in my workflow. It's baffling to me that I have to go through so many years in my career. My background is in graphic design. I have a traditional degree in graphic design, so I went to school for it. I wonder, I always think, why did I have to wait so many years and create so many inaccessible products, designing without knowing what I was doing for so many years, until now, this far into my career, realizing, oh, I've been doing things wrong. It's time to start doing things right. But I wonder, when should we start learning about accessibility? How early can we start teaching people that are getting into design or in general about accessibility practices?
Well, to do it right, if blue sky, if I could wish for anything, you'd start as early as high school. You'd have like disability studies that would be worked into your, high school social studies, where you're taught as a teenager to understand, all the different levels of human ability, to understand aging. I mean, just think of how much more human you'd be like when you graduate from high school, and it would serve you for anything: being an engineer, an architect, working in an office, being an HR person, being a manager. Like it would help you be a better human and be like more compassionate, or more empathetic with your employees or your coworkers. So, I mean, for me, it's like, yeah, I mean, if I had my way, that's the way it would be. But good luck getting that into like a high school curriculum. You'd have to get rid of something else, like Andrew Jackson or Robert E. Lee or something along those lines that people are attached to.
At least in extracurricular activities, or even, when people know that they're going to go into a certain career, where, as you mentioned, if they're going into architecture, if they're going into anything regarding design or engineering, I feel like there could be something there. I mean, I think, and we've talked about this a lot in terms of boot camps. I want to they go through accelerated learning. Most of them are, they do it in 9 weeks. I feel like
Right.
there's space for that. If you put it, again, back to what you said at the beginning, if you make it part of the requirement, the projects that you're working on while you're attending the boot camp, and really plant that seed, I feel like people, once you turn this onto them, they have the ability to kind of like go deep and apply it in everything that they do, which I think is quite interesting. So I definitely think education is crucial here, because again, I use my own story as continuously thinking, why so late in my career? I mean, you could say that I have many years ahead of me in my career,
Right.
but I've been designing for 12 years, more than that if you think about kind of like the freelance and all the websites that I did while I was in college. So I guarantee you none of those pass, especially because at the beginning I was doing stuff in Flash, which were really flat files. But with that said, what do you think are the biggest roadblocks in accessibility as a whole?
Awareness, and awareness. I mean, really. I mean, we come from a society that's extremely ableist, and we don't recognize the sort of insane bias that we have against people with disabilities and people who are older. So, if, for instance, if you look at a hip brand, you're going to see nothing but young people in their marketing materials. You see, like, typically, when you're showing models for something, even for stuff that's directed at seniors, the models will be younger than the target age group that you're aiming your marketing at. And that's because older people, for marketing purposes, aspire to look and be younger. So, we're coming into this with these real sort of societal values where we think people with disabilities as being boring, scary, ugly, what have you. And it shows in product design. If you're looking for a cane or a wheelchair, chances are it's going to be the ugliest piece of garbage you've ever seen, because no one, from an industrial design point of view, has looked at this potentially as an object of art. And, a wheelchair, now they're starting to come out with wheelchairs that are starting to look like bicycles. And then have, beautiful sort of aluminum frames and stuff, or walkers, that are out there. But those are the exception. They're not the rule. If you think, you're going to take your bathroom and you're going to make it accessible and you're going to put shower bars in there and you're going to add all kinds of mobility features to your bathroom, most people would think about it as like, I'm going to take this beautiful bathroom and I'm going to make it look ugly as sin. So
Yeah.
there's this real resistance in the design community because, instead of looking at accessibility and instead of looking at product design for people with disabilities as a challenge, as a way of creating objects of beauty, we've treated it with just such a tremendous amount of disrespect. And so the same sort of attitude, if you take it into the digital world, is where a lot of designers are coming from in their resistance to accessibility. So that sort of disrespect for design for people with disabilities is
Beautiful design, yeah.
And it's an easy bias to have because it's just all around us, but we just don't appreciate it. I mean, imagine if we just, if we designed ugly clothing for people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And oh yeah, you're of color. Hey, we're going to design something incredibly ugly for you. I mean, we wouldn't tolerate that sort of bias and discrimination. And yet, when it comes to ability and disability, I mean that bias is extremely pervasive. I mean, it's just so ubiquitous that you almost don't see it.
Yeah,
You
you
think
made
that's
me think
normal.
about something else. There was a story on Twitter a couple of weeks ago about a blind person that was walking into an accessible stall.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, I don't know why we designed it in such a way, but changing tables, I'm guessing because designers are thinking about the space entirely as, square feet as opposed to really how the space needs to be functional. Changing tables are inside of the accessible stall, and somebody changed their baby and left it open. So a person comes with their cane, and the cane obviously is touching the ground and the space in front of her, but she just went straight into, with her hip, really hit and injured herself against the changing table that was left open. The person that came in before her didn't think to put it back where it belonged, against the wall, etc. And it made me think, as you're talking about this and you put the example of bathrooms, that even within accessibility, we have heavy biases towards mobility, for example. So when we're thinking about physical spaces, we're only thinking about mobility, adding these bars. We're not thinking about all other kinds of disabilities. And I wonder how we could be better at that. Again, if we go back to education, I feel like understanding through these stories that people are openly sharing everywhere, I think we can learn a lot.
I mean, and what you're describing is not something intentional against someone with a disability.
Of course,
It's a
yeah.
sin of omission or it's a sin of neglect that you have there. It would be like, for instance, for an architect to put a floating stairway in a lobby of a hotel. So imagine this beautiful piece of terrazzo going up to the second floor that's just floating there and there's nothing underneath it. Beautiful, clean design, except your same blind person is trying to cane their way around the lobby. They
Yeah.
don't feel anything on the floor until that stairway hits them in the face.
Yes. Yeah.
So these are the sort of hazards that are out there that, any architect or interior design would build into a structure and not think about it unless they were trained to think about it in the first place. So either there's, code standards, through the ADA, or there's, or there's some sort of education, to understand these additional human factors, or, these additional sort of physical situations that you need to be aware of.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, awareness is a huge barrier. The other sort of aspect, and I think that is a barrier, is I don't consider myself disabled. Even though I wear progressives, even though I have tinnitus or whatever, I would not consider myself disabled. And I don't feel like I need to be disabled to practice accessibility. Somebody said, those of us who have the ability have a great responsibility. So for somebody who's thinking about getting into this, like, do not feel like you need to be disabled enough to be a poster child for this. No, you just need to think sensibly. This is, it's kind of like an unconscious bias issue that you're working with. It's not an issue where you have to have experienced something firsthand. So a lot of stuff that comes with accessibility is a lot of that comes from common sense. Where I feel a lot of it is some of the difficulty that people have in talking about accessibility also may come from a place where if I were disabled and I were that blind person running into floating stairways or running into obstacles, or, finding things suddenly in my way, when it's completely preventable from just common sense design and running into that thousands of times, I would probably have a chip on my shoulder.
We talked about increased awareness and education. Where do you think the industry or the profession is going towards right now? Where do you think this is going?
Well, I see a change in awareness. I mean, for me, being like the first person in South Florida to be talking publicly about accessibility, and then seeing it being, something that people are interested in, something where people are sharing articles on Slack, and I had nothing to do with this, is awesome. So, I mean, to go from that to, having hundreds of UXers, interested in this, aware of this, whatever, within the community, there is definitely an awareness that's growing. And I don't think it's going to just stop right there. I think it's going to continue growing. So I think there's a lot of feeling in the accessibility community. If I've been in it for 30 years and I've barely seen the needle move, it's easy to not see the sea change that's happening, because it's so easy to think, well, this, I don't see websites getting any better. I don't see, the ADA being modified or new regulations and stuff going out. But the awareness, which is really like the pivotal point to this, that is changing dramatically. And I feel like, in 2 or 3 years, it's going to be that much more important. So I think we're getting close to that tipping point where, instead of being looked at as sort of niche specialty or something that, some people are talking about this, where it's going to start becoming to be a core part of the UX design practice. So I feel like, we're just kind of there, just kind of laying the foundations or laying out the blueprints for this to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Claudio, for you, what's next? What are you working on?
I have my hands in a lot of pies there. so what sort of stuff have I been working on? Well, let's see. There's a day without alt, which is proposing to have like a social media campaign running the week of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which just raise awareness around alt text, because that is like, the low-hanging fruit of low-hanging fruit with accessibility.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we still managed to not get that right. So I figured a day without alt could be a fun thing. So we're pitching that, putting together like a watchdog group, like an industry watchdog group, to look at companies in the accessibility space, to be able to, like, evaluate products, see what's going on. And there's been a lot of, particularly with a couple bad actors who have been doing a of marketing, doing a lot of SEO, and getting to the point where if you look up accessibility, they will come up first in a Google search. And unfortunately, they sell worthless products, and their marketing, they do a lot of paid for business reporting, which they make it seem like it's real reporting. They do a lot of astroturfing. So that's the sort of stuff that needs to be called out. But
yeah, it ends up doing more damage than good.
Exactly. So I do fear the sort of reputational damage that's doing. But, lots of little collaborations, like, you probably saw we were talking about how do you translate terms from English into Spanish, and then that's turned into like a lexicon of over 80 terms between Spanish and English. So that should be coming out in a couple of weeks. But, little tools, little sort of collaborations like that, within a couple of weeks, you can start from an idea, you have a product, and it actually fills a gap that you have in the accessibility community. And there are hundreds of projects out there that could be handled like that in the accessibility community. So when I say that, accessibility is half baked, I mean, what I mean is that there are gaps in the practice of accessibility. And you can look at that as a limitation, or you can look at that as an opportunity to build a tool or to bridge that gap, through some sort of methodology or something, or some sort of contribution. And, I came to accessibility after being like 12 years in the open source community, and working, within a community for an open source CMS. And that kind of brings you this sort of ethic, like you are what you contribute. So I've been finding all kinds of good stuff, where I can contribute, and it's like, hey, let's just build something. Let's do this. Let's get a couple of people collaborating on it, and then let's see what we can do. So I would say, like, unless I get another day job that is really all consuming, I'll be doing a lot more of these sorts of small collaborations.
That's awesome. Speaking of small collaborations, for those of you interested, Claudio will be doing a webinar with us in November. We're going to be announcing that very soon, so stay tuned here and also on Instagram. And Claudio, where can people find you online?
Okay, so best place, if you want to reach me and you want to talk to me, best place is LinkedIn. A lot of the webinars and stuff that we're doing is on a YouTube channel, UX Florida, and I've just been using that as a repository for putting stuff. So there's probably a good 6 or 8 webinars there, and we're going to be doing more. There's one that's going to be coming up on October 29th, where we're going to be talking about AAC. And that is a topic that is very dear to me. And this is, how do you bring speech? What sort of technologies do you use to give a voice to people who have no speech? So imagine you have ALS or something where you can no longer speak, but you're literate. How do you get a device, like an iPad or something, to speak for you? And
Wow.
what are the design considerations that go into this? And from an assistive technology point of view, it's probably one of the most underserved aspects of assistive technology, but yet for designers, it's one that really should present the most interest. So one of the things I'd love to do is be able to show this and see if, like, hey, maybe there's an open source project that can come out of this where we as designers can actually contribute design, can contribute illustration that really has an impact in someone's life. So that's why it's a real pet subject of mine. So that'll be on the 29th.
All right, awesome. Everything that we talked about, links will be in the description. Thank you so much, Claudio. I really appreciate you being here and sharing some of your stories. And I look forward to collaborating more on the webinar and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us in the conversation. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Feel free to subscribe for more content like this, and let us know in the comments down below, how do you expect to add accessibility as part of your workflow? We're super curious about it. We'll catch you on the next video.